Hey, everybody, welcome to an unexpected podcast. This is Matt in Boston. Hey, with us is Evan today, also in Boston, and Rob in DC. This is going to be a shorter format episode, and the reason is due to various life transitions and other things that are going on. Some of our normal podcast members aren't going to be available for the next few weeks, stretching into months. So we're going to be doing some shorter format episodes with a smaller number of us. This is going to be the first of those. And for this one, we're going to continue our never-ending story about Defense of the North, and we're going to discuss some of the lists that we didn't talk about last time, do a little bit of a quick but deep dive into some of those lists. And these are the lists that Rob has been really excited to play. So Rob, what do you want to talk about?
The thing that I always want to talk about, always, which is the Army of Dale, my new growing favorite army. I think it would be hard to dislodge Gondor in my heart permanently, but as this, excitement for Defense of the North is swirling around us, I've just been having a ton of fun with this new Legendary Legion, and I think it's a very, very interesting army to play. I know I've kind of gushed about it to various degrees before on the podcast, but now that yeah, but now that we've had some time actually with models on the table and rules in hand, so to speak. It's
and you've recovered from your fainting couch.
I have recovered from my fainting couch, at least for the moment. I have a backup, two actually behind me there for, when the excitement really hits me. But I don't know if I know everybody's been playing games with all the new lists. I don't know if you've had an opportunity to either play with or against the Army of Dale yet. I know at least through online chatter of all of the various things coming out in this book, it seems to be going a little bit under the radar. I mean, it's probably not as exciting as Beornings and Easterlings, and so an assault on Lothlorien, God help us.
Yeah, well, Evan and I were actually just at the Atlantic City Open last weekend, and the Army of Dale was conspicuously absent. There were several Legion of the Dragon Emperor lists there. There was somebody who brought the Assault on Lothlorien list, and there was even an Army of Bears being kind of substituted onto the board.
Yeah.
But no Army of Dale.
Yeah, and I think to some degree it's because the army's expensive. It's pretty much you're buying a lot of Forge World, so you have to really be committed to the army if you want to spend that kind of money. And before like 2 weeks ago, they didn't have a Legendary Legion, so there wasn't this kind of binding reason to play them outside of love. But now I think with the Legendary Legion, there's definitely a competitive argument to be made for them, because the models were all good already, the profiles, but now you gave them all Fearless, which is just, in the current meta or in any meta, is just such a strong tool to play with. So I have been mostly playing them at lower points, so not at the kind of 800 level where I want to take them for Nova practice and try out that Windlance. So unfortunately, I don't have a lot of Windlance data as of yet to talk about, though I imagine it'll be just as disappointing as Matt thinks it is. But just as fun as I hope it is.
So,
but I have done a lot of practice with just the core infantry concept with the knights and the bows, and you can fit a remarkably large amount of the Dale army list into a low point army. It's kind of a little bit like Arnor in that sense, where because the heroes are cheaper, you can still have all of them and have an army behind you. And they work essentially as intended, right? I mean, it's definitely an army that has its weaknesses, especially because you don't have kind of a mega hero of your own. So if you run into an opponent's mega hero, there's kind of a management crisis on your hands. But it kind of works as advertised. It does what it says on the tin. You've got a really strong line of infantry that people don't actually want to fight, because if they lose against them, they're going to get lanced, and nobody likes to get lanced. You have a pretty sizable bow contingent, and they're all really strong bows because they're elf bows and they hit on threes. And because those bowmen can also take spears, you don't actually end up losing real estate on your battle line if you don't want to. So there's scenarios where sitting back and shooting is just implausible, and you can kind of avoid that problem pretty easily. And all of the heroes, I think I think the thing I'm finding with this army that is the most fun, especially compared to armies I usually play, which, people who know me will know that they usually revolve around some kind of big hero, Boromir, Aragorn, something like that. Because they're all essentially kind of mid-tier heroes, you don't have to be quite as worried about them. And so your army becomes very decentralized, right? It's not like a Boromir with Banner where there's a compelling reason to kind of have proximity in your battle line to something. So when it comes to scenarios like Reconnoiter, for example, or some of the objective scenarios, you're like, all right, each warband is fairly self-sufficient. So I don't have to super worry about, this, that, or the other. I can just kind of play the game and let the infantry carry it. But at the same time, the heroes are just strong enough that your opponent can't completely ignore them, right? I mean, they have strike. Bard in particular has a +1 to wound mechanic. So, he's dangerous when he wants to be. They have 3 attacks. So when you really want them to turn it on and kill infantry, they can. So just like the rest of the army, the entire list is kind of just one big dilemma for your opponent, which turns into this little mini game of, do I focus the heroes or not? Because if he loses them, unless it's Brand in a game against a full terror army, it's not the end of the world, right? Like they're not going to cripple him by dying, outside of giving up leader points, for example. But at the same time, if I do ignore them, they're going to consistently chip away at my troops, right? You've got the dilemma of, do I come to the army and charge it, which he wants me to do, because the knights kind of turn on in a more static defensive position, and risk that, or do I kind of sit back and risk the bows? And so your opponent is constantly having to think about something, and the more your opponent is thinking about something and the less you have to think about something, the more they're likely to make a mistake, and the less likely you are, right? So it's a very interesting army to play. I'm very excited about it. I want to get 1,000 more games with it and play it at 1,000,000 tournaments. And do I think it's the kind of army that can win Articon? I mean, probably not, right? I mean, there's just some really powerful builds out there that if you're on a top table, you're gonna need a lot of luck and a lot of skill to kind of break through. But do I think it can do really well? Is it a 4-2-5-1 army? Definitely. And it's also has the benefit of not making your opponent want to take you out back afterwards and stuff you in a trash can. So it creates a game where everybody's happy at the end of it, and I love it. So
I mean, just for the listeners out there who don't remember a few episodes back, which was probably going to be like a couple months ago when by the time this comes out.
Yeah.
The Army of Dale is a very simple legendary legion. It has Bran, King of Dale. It has Bard, Prince of Dale. You can get the cheap 50 point captains, or 55 points if you give them a shield. You can get Knights of Dale. You can get Warriors of Dale with all the options, which now include Warhorns, banners, Esgaroth bows, which are basically elf bows, and you can get a wind lance. And then the special rules that come with it are the skilled bowman, which increases everybody's shoot value to 3, or at least everybody that can shoot value to 3. And then protect the king, which gives every friendly Dale model Sworn Protector Brand, which essentially makes them all fearless until Brand goes down, which I think in some situations give you an incentive to just hide Brand.
Absolutely. But that's the brilliant thing about it is you can take Brand out of your battle line,
right? And
your army doesn't lose that much effectiveness, right? So like when you really need to hide Brand because he's more valuable as just like a living body, great. Just let him get paralyzed 6 inches behind your line and sit there for the rest of the game. You don't care, right? As long as he's given that fearless.
So at 800 points, what does this army look like? I mean, how many figures are in this thing at 800 points?
So it varies a tiny bit by whether or not you're taking the wind lance, but shockingly not too much.
Let's assume for the sake of argument that you're not.
So if you're not taking the wind lance, you're probably looking at 800 points at somewhere in the 48 to 50 models range, because you're going to get both of your heroes. Now, this is assuming that you're taking mostly knights, right? If you're taking mostly warriors, you might get a couple models north of that. But as I've discussed in our previous podcast, I don't actually think that's a good idea in this particular army. I think that mathematically, you're just better off taking more knights. But you're essentially getting about 15 bows, warriors with bows. You're getting a banner. you're getting probably in the range of 30 knights, let's say 28 to 30 knights, and you're probably maybe also getting a couple warriors and 2 captains, right? If you're not taking the wind lance. So I believe that at 800 with the wind lance, it's 47 models or 48 models. So if you drop the wind lance, because you've already filled up your warbands at that point, you have to take another captain. And the captain's already 55 points. So that only really gives you like 20 points for warriors, which is only, you're only getting 2 to 3 models at that point, but it's, still going to possibly push you north of 50. So,
Gotcha.
So it's actually a sizable amount.
Yeah, that's a sizable amount of fight 4, shoot 3 figures.
Defense 6, right? As well on your battle line. So
and I assume you're going to max out the bows.
Yes, always.
Yeah, so you're in the order of, oh my gosh, I'm trying to do math in my head. 10, so like 16, perhaps 7, probably like 16 bows.
Yeah, you're probably looking somewhere between 14 and 17, let's say. Like you can vary a little depending on build, but for 800 points, you can get a shockingly large number of elf bows, right? That are still on a fight 4 body, right? That usually carries a spear. So they can plug in when they need to. So you're actually getting good numbers, and unlike a lot of horde armies where you're getting a lot of good numbers, they're still solid troops, right? With a defense 6 across your line. Everybody has a spear, so it's very flexible in terms of, if the game shifts one way or the other, everyone can kind of support everyone else. And then a third or 2/3 of your army have a lance effectively, and the other third has an elf bow. So I mean, it's pretty great.
Well, they've got a lance that can't charge, but they've got a lance that can wait to be charged, I guess.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned this on one of the previous podcasts, but like you said, they're probably buried. The cool thing about the knights is, if you charge them, they get their lance bonus, great. And if you decline to charge them, giving up kind of so that they don't get that bonus, you're kind of giving up the movement phase a little bit to the Dale player, and they can choose their combats, and then the front rank's going to feint anyway. So you're either getting +1 to wound or re-rolling 1s to wound.
Yeah.
Or so no matter what you're doing, or they'll just shoot you. So no matter what you're doing, there's a threat coming your way one way or another. And now with the fearless, you can't really rely on, they're probably going to fail the charge. If I have terror, I probably have harbinger, so I can probably control where they move. Not the case with this army, so long as you can keep Brand alive. So you continue to have a lot of options in the movement phase, and even against heavy control armies like a Black Riders. I mean, you have so many bows that as long as you can protect Brand, you can shoot out a bunch of horses and kind of just like outlast them, right? So though that's a tough matchup for anybody, obviously, in skilled hands, Black Riders is brutal, but all bodyguard is one of the ways to approach it. So
although I think what you need to do there is you need to find some terrain that can actually conceal Brand and hide him in it, because otherwise he's going to get black dart.
If you could
every black dart in
the if you could physically dig a grave on the battlefield and just like lay him in there and cover him up a little, that's what you would do. But against Black Riders, I've even done that in Gondor armies with models like Boromir, where I'm like, you know what? You're just more valuable alive, so go to the back and stay there while the troops kind of hold these 9 models in place, right? And win on the scenario. Except now you have close to 50 models that can do that, minus a few that are going to encircle Brand. And then if these horsemen charge you, which, they're going to have to eventually, then, their horses are going to die if they lose that combat, because you're fight 4 with a lance, right? So yeah, it's just that I think that it's an army with a lot of nuance. I think it requires some skill, or at least some practice to play, to kind of figure out the right dynamic in the movement phase between seeding movement or taking initiative. But I think that competitively speaking, it's flying a little bit under the radar, but it's a lot better than people are giving it credit. And I think it's not too dissimilar to Theodred's Guard, which people ignored until suddenly they discovered it, and now it's considered a perfectly competitive army, right?
So there's been some pushback on Facebook, let's just say, with some people believing that this Legendary Legion was a waste of the Legendary Legion slot, because obviously there's 6 slots for Legendary Legions, and people criticize this one for only having really one special rule that differentiates it from the actual list. So in your opinion, would it have been better if this was simply relegated to an army list and then maybe we got a new Lothlorien Legendary Legion? Or do you think this should have gotten more special rules? What do you think about this?
I
Having
mean,
played this Legion.
look, I think that as a general statement, the fact that Lothlorien didn't get a Legendary Legion is pretty shocking. And if I played Lothlorien as my main army, I'd be pretty upset about it, because this is like the third book that features Lothlorien in some capacity with no Legion. So like, I mean, yes, if they had to limit themselves to 6 legions, this is the one that probably could have been dropped, simply because it does, like, you could have probably given the bodyguard rule just to Brand or something and left it in the army list.
Or you could have just changed the army special, the pure army special rule to be everybody gets sworn protector Brand.
Yeah, I mean, you could have done the thing they did for Airborne
right?
Reclaimed, right? Yeah. So like, I'm hesitant to wade into kind of like the planning and logistics phase of a book to see whether or not this Legion should exist as opposed to a Lothlorien one, because obviously I'm glad this Legion does exist, but I equally think that a Lothlorien Legion, especially one tied to the defense of the North, should have happened. Now, that said, I think from a game design perspective, it's remarkable to see how you can create a Legendary Legion that is not bloated with 3 pages of special rules and takes an army from good to really good and fun and competitive without having to like fundamentally rewrite core rules or just, put in a lot of bloat and a lot of tricks. Like, it just created a solid core fundamentals army that I think is really great to have in the game for people who just want to play Lord of the Rings, right? Like, this is an army that just plays the game. It plays all the fundamentals well. It's both beginner friendly and kind of experienced, fun for experienced players. So am I glad that it exists? Absolutely. Is there other ways you could have achieved it? Yeah, sure. I mean, the way that Old Dane changes the Erebor Reclaimed bonus, you could have said that, Girion has the 3+ to shoot. And if you take Brand in the army, then they also get Sworn Protector Brand because it represents like that era of Dale. But that said, I'm glad it exists, right?
Yeah. I think the argument is that there is no difference between the army of Dale and just changing that one paragraph of what happens when you take a pure army to say everybody gets Sworn Protector Brand. I mean, that's literally all that they changed in this. And I mean, if you look at if you compare this with the Legion of the Dragon Emperor, I mean, part of what it does is it takes some models out. If you take that Legion, there's stuff on the Eastern list you can't take, and it adds in, it adds in, there's a special rule in there which, it's a good special rule, but it doesn't fundamentally change the army, but it changes the points levels of figures, right? So what happens when you take that Legion is that Legion, and you end up with an army that looks different on the table than the Easterling armies that have kind of come before. And I think the criticism of the Army of Dale Legendary Legion is it doesn't look any different from how an Army of Dale would look if you just took it pure, right? And possibly the reason that a Lothlorien Legion was left out is for the same reason, right? That the Lothlorien Legion would probably look at least very similar to just a standard Lothlorien build. Although presumably Haldir wouldn't be there, so I guess that would be kind of one difference.
And you'd be locked into probably having to take Celeborn, right? So like it would limit you in that sense that Dale has to take Brand, Lothlorien would have to take Celeborn,
right? Yep. And yeah,
there's
I mean,
the whole idea of the transforming Galadriel as well, which would be
that would have been fun
to take.
I honestly don't even think she needs to transform. I think just having Lady of Light as a hero for the army list that can lead troops, right? Even if you have to stay as Lady of Light, would have been formative for Lothlorien anyway, simply because of the fact that now after the FAQ, they can't really even take her, right? At least before you could ally her in fairly easily, even if it was inefficient for your troops.
I do have to say that having the ability for her to transform would have been that was a missed opportunity.
Yeah,
on behalf of the rules.
I think that would have been super cool. But I mean, to address the criticism, and I'm not necessarily disagreeing with the criticism, right? I mean, it didn't bring as much to the army as you might think, even though technically right now it's the only place you can play the Wind Lance. Though I imagine that's FAQ'd out, but right now you can't actually take the Wind Lance in a normal Garrison of Dale army.
Right.
I think that it has been fairly transformative though, because that fearless for the entire army really kind of pushes it over the top, whereas before it was good, but it had a lot more weaknesses. And I would kind of level the same criticism at the the Fell Beasts of Mirkwood, right? Like that Legion really doesn't bring anything except giving woodland creature to a few orcs that you couldn't already do with just taking Razgush, right? And allying in the Spider Queen. So I mean, I think
that's also fair, and I think that
right,
has also been criticized kind of along those grounds.
Yeah, I think that either of those
already
could have been taken out.
Heard,
so
yeah,
and I mean, so I think both of them are cool. I think obviously Army of Dale, I think, is cool, considering that this is kind of like my main force for a little while, and I think that it might have also been a little bit less seen through that lens if the book itself hadn't been so spread out, because we had the knights in hand and the characters so long ago that it kind of feels like the army didn't change. Whereas if you got them all with the book, as was probably intended at some point, and suddenly you're like, oh my God, Garrison of Dale went from Girion with a couple dudes to these new characters and this entire new troop type and this entire new way to play the army, it would have felt a little more exciting than it did with this kind of year and a half or whatever it was lead time. But I think you could also level that criticism at a lot of different Legendary Legions across books as well, right? Where you're like, well, why does this have to exist necessarily, as opposed to something else? And that's almost a different conversation to have, that you need to kind of sit down with the people who plan out the books and pick their brain on the thought process. But that said, aside from the criticism of do I take up real estate that other people wanted for something else, I do think the Legion justifies itself, at least in the sense of this is a solid army that people want to or should want to play, and has brought something to the game that is a little bit different, which is just a very elite troop-centric army that kind of plays the game a little bit differently. Could it have been done outside of a Legion and with just the tack-on rule to any one of the characters? Absolutely. But as they say where I'm from, if grandma had balls, she'd be grandpa, kind of thing.
Which raises interesting questions about where you're from, but that's a different podcast. All right, so thank you, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. This is, like I said, this was going to be a bit of a short episode, so I think we're going to cut it off here, and hopefully we'll be back with you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody.